While this action today is unsettling and unprecedented, I can't say that given some of the rhetoric of the past, that we're totally surprised.
That was Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser just reacting to President Trump's move yesterday to take over the district's police department and activate 800 members of the National Guard in hopes of reducing crime. Here now, to offer more context in this move, is Emory political science professor and friend of the show, Andra Gillespie. And welcome back to the show, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what makes this this move of legal status that the president has to directly assume control over the police force?
Well, DC is in a special state because it is not surrounded by a state. So it is not part of an existing state. So Atlanta is part of Georgia. You would expect that the governor would intervene if there were something terrible happening in Atlanta first. Washington, DC, as a federal district, has its own special status. So we all know that DC doesn't have voting representation in Congress. It doesn't have senators. It only has a delegate, not a full voting House member. And so its budget and its oversight is overseen by the federal government. So Congress provides its budget. Congress has committees that oversee what's happening there. And in the case of emergencies, based on the 1973 Home Rule Act, the president has the right to be able to intervene. So that's why Mayor Bowser couldn't say that she was going to resist this takeover, because she really isn't in a place legally where she's able to do that.
The president called on something called the Home Rule Act as a reason for this move. Tell us what that is, and does it allow him to call the National Guard for this reason?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, you can call the National Guard for emergencies. So I think that, if there's going to be any contestation over this, it's going to be whether or not the carjacking of a former Doge employee rises to the level of an emergency. This is not to minimize any crime issues that are in DC, but those statistics are in dispute. And if we look at the National Uniform Crime Reporting data that the FBI puts out, crime has started to go down on most violent indicators since 2023. The question is whether or not that happens soon enough, because in the United States, overall, most sort of crime peaked in recent eras around between 2020 and 2022. So there's this larger issue of how data is being interpreted that I think we can get into. But basically, before 1973, DC was run completely by the federal government. They couldn't elect their own mayor. They couldn't elect their own city council. The Home Rule Act enabled that. So for those of us who, were little at that time or were born after, we don't know a DC that hasn't been able to elect a mayor, but that has actually only been around for about 50 years. And so DC has autonomy, but when they mess up, Congress can come in and intervene. And so we saw this during the mayorship of Marion Barry, that DC's finances were taken over by a control board that was put in place by Congress. And so now what President Trump is saying is that the crime situation has gotten so out of hand that he needs to be able to call in the National Guard for a month to get them to engage in policing activity.
Yeah. What should we be watching for in the coming weeks to gauge whether or not public opinion sees this as an effective way to govern?
So, I have no doubt that the national news outlets are going to include some type of question like this in surveys. So, we should see the fruits of that in a couple of weeks. I also want to see what happens. We want to see whether or not President Trump actually makes good on his threat to try to take over, policing in other cities. So he named a litany of cities like Baltimore and Oakland and Chicago and New York, where he was like, this could be coming to you. It's a lot harder for him to do that in state or in cities where there are states with governors. He would have to do something like he did in Los Angeles, and that's being litigated right now, where he has to say that the mayor and the governor are kind of derelict in their duties and not addressing a situation. And so I think that, if that were to happen, we would likely see litigation. And I think that there could be some litigation here about whether or not crime, as horrible as it is actually warranting sort of the definition of an emergency. But now that we are where we are, I think we want to see if crime rates fall further sort of in this coming month compared to previous months or last year in particular. And as somebody who has lived in Washington, D.C. before, I know that the crime rate varies depending on what part of the district you're in.
Mhm.
I'm paying attention to Ward 7 and Ward 8. So that's the southeast part of the city. That's where there's typically been high crime. So, does this initiative actually make things better there or does it make it worse?
Right.
So I think that there are a lot of things that we could be looking at.
All right. Thank you, Professor Gillespie. Really appreciate your insight on this.